Imagine you spend like months, or honestly, maybe even years, building this just incredibly elaborate, beautiful glass house.
Oh, a glass house.
Yeah,
Okay.
like we are talking high-tech custom architecture, flawless transparent walls, um, just the works.
Right.
And naturally, because you put so much work into it, you want everyone to see it.
Of course you do.
You leave the lights on at night so it just glows in the dark. You post the architectural blueprints online.
Yeah.
You even put a little interactive map on the internet showing exactly how to get to your front door from the main highway.
Which, makes perfect sense if you view it purely through the lens of craftsmanship.
Exactly.
Like when you pour that much labor and love into a project, you just want to share the joy of the build with other architects.
Yeah,
The sharing is completely innocent. And really the transparency is the whole point of a glass house.
it is. But that innocence is the key here. Because then, almost overnight, the neighborhood around you completely changes.
The atmosphere just shifts.
Right. It is not just this friendly, sleepy street anymore where everyone just leaves their doors unlocked. Suddenly, being the most visible, glowing glass house on the block isn't a point of pride anymore.
No, it becomes a massive glowing vulnerability.
Exactly. Welcome to the Deep Dive. I am just thrilled you are here with us today because if you are the kind of person who loves to learn, who really appreciates those sudden aha moments, and who wants to understand the invisible systems keeping our world running without, getting bogged down in impenetrable jargon, this is exactly where you need to be.
It really is.
Today, we're looking at this absolutely fascinating, deeply thoughtful, and honestly slightly urgent chronicle. It was written by a Norwegian amateur radio operator named Tom.
Right, operating under the call sign LB6QJ.
Yes, LB6QJ.
And it is just a remarkable piece of writing. Tom frames it as this personal reflection on his hobby, but it very quickly unfolds into something universally critical.
It really does.
He touches on the fragility of our modern infrastructure and what happens to the people who quietly hold the backup keys to society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our goal today is to explore a fascinating tension. We are looking at this clash between the joyful, traditionally very open culture of the amateur radio hobby.
Which is a huge community.
Huge, a community entirely built on sharing every technical detail. We're looking at the clash between that and the sudden, very real need for national security and operational secrecy.
What's fascinating here is the core paradox.
Yeah.
You have this hobby, right? And to the outside observer, it looks like a seemingly innocent pastime. Just people tinkering in their garages, soldering wires together, talking to strangers across the globe.
Just a weekend project kind of vibe.
Exactly. But as we will explore today, this hobby is actually a load-bearing pillar of modern society's crisis preparedness. They are the ultimate fail-safe.
Which is wild to think about.
And the moment you realize you are the fail-safe, your behavior has to fundamentally change.
Right. So I want to start by setting the stage with what we might call the golden age of sharing. For the amateur radio community, this golden age is basically their entire history up until, well, very recently. The culture of openness isn't just a side effect of the hobby, it is the absolute bedrock.
It's the foundation of everything they do.
Tom details this long-standing tradition in his chronicle, and he paints a picture of a community built on just radical transparency.
Because the lifeblood of their community is communication.
Literally and figuratively.
Literally over the airwaves, of course, but metaphorically in how they treat their knowledge. There is no hoarding of information in this world.
None. They swap frequencies all the time. They spend hours discussing the finest technical specifications of their gear. They share their experiences, their successes, their failures.
And most importantly, they love to brag about their station setups.
Oh, the bragging is a huge part of it.
It really is. It is completely standard practice in this community to post high-resolution photos of their radios, to show off these sprawling antenna parks in their backyards, and, this is the crazy part, to register their exact coordinates in open public databases.
Yeah, when I read that, I was shocked. Because to a modern cybersecurity expert, or really anyone accustomed to digital privacy laws today, that level of data sharing sounds totally reckless.
It sounds insane. But we have to understand the mechanics of why this matters to them.
Right. Why do they do it?
This open sharing serves a fundamental purpose. It builds the community, it fosters collective knowledge, and crucially, it is the primary tool for recruiting beginners into the hobby.
Oh, that makes sense. If everything is hidden, how do you even know the hobby exists in the first place?
Exactly.
I'm picturing someone wanting to get into this world. Where do they even start if there are no blueprints to follow?
They start by looking at what the veterans have done. If you are a newcomer, You learn by replicating.
Right.
You look at a veteran's antenna placement. You study the specific frequencies they use to bounce a signal, say all the way to a certain part of the world, and you just try to mimic it.
You just copy their homework.
Basically. This absolute transparency removes the barriers to entry. It takes an incredibly technical, physics-heavy hobby and makes it accessible for anyone.
And Tom is very clear that he supports this open sharing culture, right? Because it allows people to exercise their privilege, to enjoy the hobby without any hindrance.
He loves that part of it.
But reading his account, I just couldn't shake a very specific thought. Imagine spending thousands of dollars on a state-of-the-art home security system.
Okay.
You install the best cameras, the most impenetrable locks, motion sensors, the works, and then you take the exact blueprints of that security system along with all the passwords and all the blind spots and you post them on Instagram to show off to other security nerds.
To get likes from other people with locks.
Exactly. Isn't that essentially what is happening here? Like, you are building resilience, but you're advertising the exact mechanics of that resilience to the entire world.
That analogy cuts right to the heart of Tom's main concern.
Yeah.
You are creating a safety net and then publishing a map of exactly where the net is frayed. And this brings us to the massive paradigm shift he discusses in the Chronicle. The author points out that the security landscape, really the geopolitical surface of the world, has changed dramatically over the last 5 years.
And he specifically emphasizes that it's not just one bad actor causing this shift.
No.
We aren't looking at, like, a single movie villain.
No, it is a decentralized threat matrix.
A threat matrix.
Yeah, multiple actors operating across various fronts, cyber, physical, economic. The world has just fundamentally shifted.
Right.
For decades, the amateur radio community could operate under the assumption of a benign global environment.
A peaceful world.
Right. The sharing was innocent because the world, relatively speaking, allowed it to be innocent. The baseline assumption was simply that nobody cared about a guy in Norway bouncing a radio waves to a guy in Brazil.
And in the last 5 years, that baseline assumption just completely evaporated.
Completely. The innocent sharing of exact coordinates and infrastructure blueprints has totally transformed into a potential liability.
It has to be such a jarring realization for these operators. I mean, you are just enjoying your hobby, logging your contacts, posting pictures of this massive antenna mast you finally managed to erect in your backyard.
After probably fighting with the local zoning board for a year.
Yes, exactly. And suddenly the context of the entire world changes around you, turning your fun backyard project into a literal geopolitical data point.
It's heavy. And to understand why these amateur setups are suddenly so important, and therefore such a massive liability when they're exposed, we have to look at the mechanics of what happens when the rest of our modern world breaks down.
Right. Let's talk about the ultimate failsafe. This is the part of the text where the sheer pride of the radio operator shines through, and honestly, it gave me chills.
It is very powerful.
Tom writes with such enthusiasm about the fact that they can talk to the other side of the country without a single cell tower.
Nothing.
Without the internet. Without any of the fragile infrastructure the rest of us just rely on blindly every single second of the day.
And that pride is entirely justified when you actually look at the architecture of modern communication.
Right.
We live in a hyper-connected world, but that connection is incredibly brittle.
So brittle.
It relies on a cascading dependency of power grids, centralized servers, undersea fiber optic cables, highly synchronized software.
It's a house of cards.
It really is.
Yes.
And when extreme weather hits, or when power grids fail, or when primary communication infrastructure just collapses under the weight of a crisis, amateur radio is often the absolute only thing left working.
Wait, I want to pause on that for a second. Why is it the only thing working? I mean, if the power grid is down, how are these guys still talking to each other? Don't radios need power?
They do, absolutely. But amateur radio setups are fundamentally decentralized and self-sufficient.
Okay.
Think about a modern cell tower. It requires a constant connection to a massive power grid, and it usually needs a physical fiber line running back to a centralized data center.
Right.
If that data center floods or loses power, the cell tower is just a useless piece of metal.
It's a glorified tree.
Exactly. An amateur radio operator, on the other hand, can run their entire station off a 12-volt car battery, or even just a small solar panel.
So they are entirely off the grid.
Off the grid and relying on physics rather than corporate infrastructure.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of routing a message through a server in California, an amateur radio operator uses specific frequencies that bounce off the ionosphere.
The ionosphere.
Right, which is a layer of charged particles in the Earth's upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
They literally use the sky as a mirror to bounce their signal over the horizon.
That is so cool.
No servers, no cables, no subscription fees, just pure physics.
And history has proven the value of this over and over again. When hurricanes wipe out cellular networks, when earthquakes sever those fiber optic cables you mentioned, it is always the amateur radio operators who step in.
Every time.
They coordinate rescues, they pass along critical information, and they provide the only analog lifeline in a total digital blackout.
And, our reliance on digital infrastructure is only getting more intense, which makes this analog lifeline even more critical.
Right.
Tom brings up a highly specific and honestly terrifying example in the text to prove this point. He references a date, July 24th, 2025.
Yeah. On this day, the Starlink satellite network went down globally for hours.
Globally.
And the cause of that global outage wasn't a meteor strike. It wasn't some explosive anti-satellite weapon. It was just a software bug.
Let's really think about the implications of that for a moment.
Okay.
We tend to view modern satellite communication as the ultimate invincible technology.
Right.
It's in space. It feels completely untouchable.
Feels magical.
But highly complex systems have microscopic failure points. If one piece of code fails during a routine update, the entire network can go dark simultaneously.
Literally, a typo in a line of code in an office somewhere takes down global communications for millions of people.
Yes. And Tom points out an even more concerning reality about these satellite networks from a national security perspective.
Oh, right, the control aspect.
Exactly. They can be turned off intentionally. They are controlled by a very small group of people or even a single corporate entity operating entirely outside of European or Norwegian jurisdiction.
You just don't control the switch. If you are a crisis manager in Norway trying to coordinate disaster relief, and the CEO of a satellite company just decides to change their terms of service or their servers get hacked, you are totally powerless.
You're entirely reliant on a system that can vanish in an instant. This provides a stark contrast to Tom's philosophy. He has this wonderful, powerful quote in the Chronicle that perfectly encapsulates the amateur radio ethos.
I know the exact one.
Two dudes with two radios can make a huge difference.
I just love that quote. It is the ultimate expression of decentralized resilience. You don't need $1 billion satellite constellation. You just need two people who know how to manipulate radio waves.
And the governments are acutely aware of this.
Yes, they are.
This is where the concept of total defense, or total forsvaret in Norway, comes into play. Tom notes that several public organs now officially view amateur radio as a vital piece of this total defense strategy.
Can you explain total defense for anyone who isn't familiar with the term? Like, what does that actually mean for an everyday civilian?
Total defense is a national security concept, very prominent in Nordic countries, which operates on the premise that national security isn't just the military's job.
Right, it's everyone's job.
Basically, in a major crisis or a wartime scenario, the military alone cannot sustain the entire country. The strategy relies on the entirety of society, including civilian infrastructure, private corporations, and volunteer organizations, all being prepared to support the nation.
So these hobbyists, these guys tinkering in their garages, have effectively been drafted into the national defense apparatus.
Involuntarily, perhaps, but essentially, yes. They have become an essential component of societal resilience. And to his credit, Tom acknowledges this shift, and he totally embraces it.
He steps up to the plate.
He does. He argues that because the amateur radio community has demonstrated its unique ability to cover critical infrastructure failures time and time again, a certain responsibility just follows naturally.
Right.
It is a heavy responsibility, absolutely, but one he views as an important voluntary duty.
They are the ultimate backup generator for society's communication.
Yes.
But this introduces the massive looming butt of the whole Chronicle.
Here we go.
If the government knows these radios are the ultimate failsafe, then potential adversaries know it too.
Well, of course. If you are a malicious actor planning to disrupt a nation, your first step is to analyze the vulnerabilities.
You map out the weak points.
Right. The primary networks like cellular and internet are susceptible to cyber attacks or physical sabotage. But if you also know that the amateur radio operators are the backup plan instantly becomes a primary target.
Which leads us straight into the terror of visibility.
It really is terrifying when you look at it.
Let's look at the sheer volume of data that is currently just floating around on the open internet. Tom lists it out, and it's staggering. I mean, there are interactive public maps where repeater positions are pinpointed with exact GPS precision.
Okay, we should probably clarify what a repeater is, as it's totally crucial to understanding this vulnerability.
Well, please do, because when I first read it, I was picturing just like a really big
A
walkie-talkie.
lot of people do. Think of a repeater like a giant megaphone perched on top of a mountain.
Okay, I'm a megaphone on a mountain.
Right. If you are standing down in a valley with a handheld radio and you try to transmit, your signal will just hit the canyon wall and stop. It's a line of sight issue. Radio waves generally don't go through solid rock.
Right, that makes sense.
But if you have an automated receiver sitting on the mountain peak, which is the repeater, it listens for your weak signal from the valley, picks it up, and instantly blasts it out at a much, much higher power down the other side of the mountain.
Ah, so it massively increases the range of communication for everyone in the region.
Precisely. They are the absolute linchpins of local amateur networks. And traditionally, the community has proudly documented exactly where these linchpins are located.
Great. Tom points out there are high-resolution photos of these antenna masts and repeaters just proudly displayed on internet forums.
Just out there for anyone to see.
Exact coordinates are shared casually in daily logs and on social media. Like, hey, just routed a signal through the repeater at this exact latitude and longitude.
Right. And intelligence agencies refer to this as OSINT, or open source intelligence.
Okay.
It is the practice of gathering actionable intelligence from publicly available sources. But in the case of the amateur radio community, the intelligence isn't just available, it is being meticulously organized and basically hand-delivered.
Right, they're doing the spy's work for them.
They really are. It transforms from innocent hobbyist chatter into what Tom calls a golden opportunity for malicious actors.
You don't even have to hack anything. You don't need a team of cyber ninjas in a dark room. You just open a regular web browser and look at the map the hobbyists cheerfully made for you.
Exactly. And if crisis occurs, whether it is a deliberate act of hybrid warfare or just a chaotic extreme weather event, these amateur installations are no longer just some guy's weekend project.
No.
They suddenly elevate to high-value strategic targets. The adversary knows exactly where they are, what kind of equipment is running, and how the power is configured, all because of that legacy culture of open sharing.
This brings up a dark but absolutely necessary thought experiment that Tom presents in the text. He asks, what would you do if you wanted to take out local communications quickly?
It's a sobering question.
It is. And when I first read that, my mind immediately went to high-tech solutions. I pictured like a targeted EMP or some sophisticated cyber warfare deploying a nasty virus into the network.
That is a very common assumption, mostly shaped by movies and news headlines.
Right.
But Tom grounds the threat in a much more pragmatic, low-tech reality.
Yes. He argues that if he wanted to take it down, he wouldn't need a billion-dollar weapons program. He would just gather a small network of people, hand them ordinary garden shears.
Literally garden shears.
Literally. And have them walk up to these highly publicized, exposed locations and just snip the coaxial cable simultaneously.
It highlights the asymmetric nature of the threat perfectly.
Asymmetric warfare.
Right. Asymmetric warfare is when two sides possess drastically different levels of power or tactics. In this scenario, you have a vital piece of national defense infrastructure, which is capable of coordinating statewide disaster relief, being completely neutralized by a $10 gardening tool from a hardware store.
It is wild to think about. Or, he mentions, if you knew a specific antenna was critical because its exact coverage radius was blasted all over a forum, you wouldn't even need to cut a cable.
No, you wouldn't.
You could just drop a cheap, commercially available signal jammer nearby.
It sounds absurdly simple, but it is entirely plausible, specifically because the physical location and the vulnerability of those cables are public knowledge.
Right.
And we really have to emphasize that Tom isn't bringing this up to be an alarmist.
No, not at all.
He isn't writing a dystopian sci-fi novel here.
It feels very grounded in practical risk assessment.
Exactly. It is simply about recognizing the reality of exposed physical infrastructure. When you put a dot on a public map and proudly announce, here is the backup lifeline for this entire region, you are simultaneously drawing a massive bullseye on it.
So what is the practical takeaway here? I mean, do we just go dark?
Well, that's the big question.
Right. Do all the amateur operators just delete their forums, tear down their websites, and retreat into absolute secrecy? Because if openness is the lifeblood of the hobby and the hobby relies on recruitment and shared knowledge to survive, does the community just have to slowly die out in order to stay secure?
That is the initial fear that many operators have when this topic is brought
I
up.
can imagine.
But Tom's chronicle is incredibly constructive precisely because he dismantles that false dichotomy.
Okay, how so?
The solution is emphatically not to stop sharing. If you pull the plug on the community, the hobby withers.
Right.
Newcomers can't learn, the community fractures, and the very resource you were trying to protect just degrades into irrelevance.
So how do you share without exposing yourself to the guy with the garden shears?
He introduces a modernized concept of operational security, or OPSEC, specifically tailored for the hobbyist. It requires drawing a strict, conscious dividing line.
A dividing line between what is useful and what is critical.
Precisely. You must separate what is useful for the ongoing health of the hobby from what is critical to national security.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, you can still share your experiences, your technical knowledge, your antenna designs, and your propagation logs. That's all fine. But you stop sharing the actionable intelligence that an adversary could weaponize.
I want to get into the concrete camouflage he proposes because this is where the theory becomes highly, highly practical.
This is the best part.
It really is. Tom outlines several very specific tactical changes for operators. First, stop mapping critical repeater and antenna parks with exact coordinates and names.
This is the most immediate, easily implemented step. A fellow hobbyist doesn't need a GPS pin accurate to the centimeter to know roughly what region you are operating in or to learn from your setup.
Exactly. Which leads directly to his second point. Replace exact photos with approximate locations or tight shots.
Right. Framing matters.
If you want to show off your new radio, take a picture of the radio sitting on your desk. You don't need to post the wide-angle drone shot of your house showing exactly which window the feed line goes into and exactly where your backup generator is located.
Exactly. And third, stop publishing detailed coverage maps for specific antennas.
Yes.
Because when you show exactly the radius of communication a single vulnerable antenna provides, you are simply handing an adversary a map of what goes dark if they snip that specific cable.
You are literally doing their intelligence analysis for them.
You really are.
And the fourth recommendation is just brilliant in its simplicity. Use secret, localized nicknames for mountain repeaters.
I love this one. How does he suggest implementing that in practice?
So when operators are broadcasting over the air, instead of saying, hey, I am routing this transmission through the primary repeater on top of Mount Galtapiggen, they use a colloquial nickname that only the local community knows.
It introduces a layer of obfuscation.
Right.
It is basically a simple, analog form of encryption. You are still communicating clearly and effectively with your local community, but anyone listening in from the outside, say a bad actor monitoring the airwaves to map out infrastructure, they lack the geographical context to actually weaponize the information.
It's so smart. But the absolute best part of this entire chronicle, the part that really crystallized this whole concept for me, is Tom's masterclass in practical camouflage.
Oh, the Senja story.
Yes. He uses his own setup as the prime example. So he lives on the island of Senja up in northern Norway, and he wanted to set up an X50 antenna.
Okay, for those who might not know, an X50 is a very common, very effective dual-band vertical antenna.
Right.
Normally, they are made of this pristine white fiberglass. They look like sleek, high-tech javelins pointing straight at the sky.
Yes. And normally, a proud radio amateur would mount this pristine white fiberglass pole on the tallest, shiniest metal mast they could possibly find, planting it right in the middle of the yard for maximum clearance and maximum visibility.
That's the legacy mindset. Maximum height, maximum signal strength, and maximum bragging rights to all the neighbors.
But Tom does the exact opposite. He mounted this X50 antenna just 2 meters off the ground.
Wow.
And the mount itself is the genius part. He didn't use a specialized aluminum pole. He went out and found an old weathered wooden post from a pig pen.
A literal pig pen post.
A pig pen post. He sanded it down and then he painted it a specific shade of green so it would seamlessly blend into the surrounding nature of his yard.
That is just fantastic. It is functional, low-tech camouflage. It takes a piece of critical communication infrastructure and visually downgrades it to look like a piece of forgotten agricultural debris.
And his reasoning for this setup is twofold, which really shows how holistic his thinking is here.
Okay, what's the first reason?
First, there is the security aspect we've been discussing. He wants the antenna to be invisible to malicious actors.
Right.
But second, he did it specifically to keep his neighbor happy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his neighbor is a gardening enthusiast, and they share a common garden area in their apartment complex. Time wanted to prove that you can be a serious, highly capable radio operator and still be a polite neighbor. Security can be polite.
The social engineering of the setup is honestly just as impressive as the physical engineering.
It totally is.
By blending into the garden, he completely eliminates friction with the neighbors, which, is often the biggest hurdle for amateur radio operators in urban environments.
And it gets even better.
Yeah.
Because it is a shared garden and people walk around at night, he was actually required by the landlord to add safety features.
Okay, so what did he do?
He put subtle, small reflectors on the wooden post so no one would accidentally trip over it in the dark.
That's hilarious.
I know. And finally, the ultimate operational security move. He buried the feed cable completely underground.
Now that is the critical detail. No exposed wires hanging off the side of a building.
Exactly. The guy with the garden shears is utterly useless against the pigpen post on Senja. You can't cut what you can't see, and you certainly can't find what just looks like a fence post.
If we pull back and really look at the broader implications of Tom's pigpen post, he is exemplifying a massive structural mindset shift that the entire amateur radio community needs to undergo.
A complete 180.
Basically, these operators are entirely accustomed to thinking in terms of signal strength, antenna height, bandwidth, and just constantly pushing the limits of physics.
It is an engineering mindset focused entirely on optimization.
Yes, and they now need to overlay a security mindset on top of that engineering foundation.
Right.
They need to start thinking in terms of robustness, camouflage, and vulnerability analysis.
Makes sense.
An antenna that is mounted a few meters lower, resulting in a slightly less optimal signal strength, but is completely invisible to a malicious actor, is infinitely more valuable in a total defense scenario than a massive, perfectly optimized tower that just gets neutralized in the first 5 minutes of a crisis.
It is the shift from building a Formula One car to building a concealed, all-terrain vehicle.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
You want the sports car on a perfect track, but when the roads disappear and people are actively trying to stop you, you need the rugged, hidden ETV.
That is an excellent way to frame it. Optimization must yield to resilience.
But this raises a significant challenge. Tom has clearly mastered this balance, right?
Yeah.
He understands the geopolitics, the total defense strategy, and how to paint a pigpen post-Grameen. But how do you teach this to someone who just bought their first radio?
That's the tricky part.
I keep going back to the recruitment aspect. How do we keep the hobby exciting for newcomers if we are telling them to hide all their coolest toys and obscure all their data?
That is definitely the most common pushback against OPSEC in hobbyist communities.
I bet.
Because if the hobby appears secretive, paranoid, and overly restrictive, it just loses its welcoming charm.
Yeah, nobody wants to join a paranoid club.
Exactly. But Tom argues, and I completely agree, that increased security awareness does not have to hurt recruitment. In fact, if framed correctly, it modernizes the appeal of the hobby.
Okay, but how do you frame hiding your gear as a selling point?
You frame the hobby as a vital, strategic, and somewhat stealthy resource for national crises. Think about the generation coming up now. They are growing up in a world totally defined by complex, invisible threats. They read about cybersecurity breaches, infrastructure fragility, and geopolitical instability literally every day.
Right, it's all over the news.
If you present amateur radio simply as like tinkering with old electronics, it might seem quaint or outdated.
It sounds like something their grandfather did in the shed.
Exactly. But if you reframe it as a critical arm of civil defense, if you tell them, hey, you are learning the skills to maintain a covert, decentralized communication network that will keep your city functioning when the digital grid collapses, that is highly compelling narrative.
That is so cool. It appeals to a deep desire to be useful, to be a protector, to possess specialized, robust knowledge.
It shifts the appeal entirely. You are no longer just an electronics hobbyist logging contacts for a certificate on your wall. You are a vital node in a decentralized resilience network.
Right.
You are learning skills that could literally save lives. That stealthy, preparedness-focused aspect is highly relevant to the future threat pictures younger generations are facing. Turns OPSEC from a boring chore into a core feature of the mission.
It is almost like becoming a civilian stealth operator.
Exactly.
I can absolutely see how that would attract a lot of very smart, very dedicated, civic-minded people.
But as we discuss the romance of being a stealth operator, we also have to ground the conversation in the sobering reality of what actually happens when these skills are needed.
Right, when things actually hit the fan.
Tom mentions a conversation he had with another, older, very experienced radio operator. They were discussing preparedness, and this older operator gave him a serious reality check about the legal and operational landscape when a crisis truly escalates.
What was the reality check?
He pointed out that in a true catastrophic national emergency like a war or a massive coordinated attack on infrastructure, the everyday rules of the hobby vanish instantly.
Poof, gone.
Gone. The illusion of complete autonomy completely disappears.
So the older operator told him that if a severe crisis occurs, the military or national defense forces will likely step in immediately.
And this is a fundamental legal reality that every single operator must understand. In a state of national emergency, the authorities will likely dictate exactly how civilian communication equipment will be used.
Right.
Total defense isn't just a suggestion, it is a mobilization.
So the military might just, take over the equipment.
They could. They might mandate that operators use specific encrypted frequencies. They might enforce strict communication protocols dictating exactly what can and cannot be transmitted over the air.
Wow.
Or, as the older operator pointed out, they might completely suspend civilian call signs altogether to prevent confusion or interception by the enemy.
So Tom's call sign, LB6QJ, this identity he has built in the community for years, might just be suspended by fiat. He wouldn't even be allowed to use it.
The overarching lesson here, and it's a profound philosophical shift for a hobbyist, is that a radio license is ultimately a privilege.
Right.
It is essentially on loan from the state. The state manages the airwaves as a sovereign resource, and in a crisis, the state will reclaim total control of those airwaves to ensure national survival.
It is a heavy realization. I mean, you spend your own money on the transceivers, you build your own equipment, you spend years learning the complex physics of radio propagation. But when the moment comes where you are needed most, you might completely lose your autonomy. You basically become an instrument of the state's defense apparatus.
Which is exactly why Tom concludes that this reality makes preparation even more vital.
Right, because you still need to be useful.
Even if the military steps in, tells you exactly what to do, and strips you of your personal call sign, your camouflaged, robust, functioning radio setup is still the physical tool they desperately need.
Yes.
You are still providing the essential infrastructure. If your setup was exposed and destroyed on day one because you posted its coordinates on Facebook, you are utterly useless to the defense effort.
So circling back to the very title of Tom's Chronicle, should everything lie open? The answer, firmly, unequivocally, and necessarily, is no.
No, it absolutely cannot. The geopolitical surface has shifted too drastically.
But the goal isn't absolute paranoid secrecy either.
Right.
It isn't about retreating to a bunker. It is about a smart, calculated balance. It's about being prepared, being robust, and being ready to serve as a vital resource without, voluntarily handing your adversaries the map to your front door. It is about understanding the difference between sharing knowledge and exposing infrastructure. It is about sanding down the pigpen post, painting it green, and burying the cable.
It represents the maturation of the hobby. It is the evolution from innocent exploration to mature, responsible preparedness.
It is an incredible journey to trace. I mean, a community built purely on the joy of connection, of talking to strangers across the world just to see if you can bend physics to your will, has suddenly found itself drafted as the silent, stealthy backbone of societal resilience.
It's quite a story.
They are the ultimate backup plan we all hope we never need, but we should be profoundly grateful to have them operating quietly in the background.
And that leads to a much broader implication for all of us, actually, even if we don't own a radio.
Oh, really? How so?
Think about your own digital footprint. Think about your own hobbies, your own skills, the data you casually share online. If the everyday tools or systems you take for granted suddenly became the only thing keeping your community safe in a crisis, how much of it would you still leave out in the open for the world to see?
Man, that is a heavy, vital question to leave on. If your beautiful glass house suddenly became the only functional shelter on the block during a storm, you would probably start wishing you had bought some heavy
You
curtains.
really would.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. You are now armed with a totally new perspective on the invisible radio waves surrounding you, the fragility of the systems we rely on, and the very real people working quietly to make sure that when everything else goes dark, a voice can still break through the static. We will see you next time.